Welcome to Cloud and Clear, the podcast by SADA for innovative business leaders and technology enthusiasts, where we explore how Google Cloud is transforming the industry and what that means to you. Now, here's your host, Tony Safoian.
So I'm very happy today to invite Travis Hahler, Culture and Change Lead at Google Cloud.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Tony.
Welcome to our headquarters. Thanks for coming out.
Beautiful office. Happy to be here.
Thank you. We were talking about kind of your role at Google and how it evolved, but I think there's always it's always best to create context around it. Like, what was your journey in your career, and what did you study, and how did you come into that to that organization when you did about 2 years ago? I'd love to cover just sort of your career trajectory a little bit.
Sure. I have a bit of an interesting path, so it's always a bit of a ride. So I guess buckle up. So I started out going to school for psychology. I love psychology. I love how the human mind works, and I always have. And so when I was studying psychology, I had the opportunity to actually go and study neuroscience and neuropsychology in Denmark. But when I came back to the US, I was kind of thinking through, like, what job do I want one day? Mm-hmm. Psychology isn't the first thing that pops into your mind when you're thinking, dollar signs and great opportunities, just, knocking on your door.
So you didn't want to be a psychologist.
Right.
Or a psychiatrist.
Yeah. I did want to be a psychiatrist, but when someone told me I had to go to medical school, that was a deal breaker. So for me, after that, I went and did a business degree, and I did my MBA from there. And that's kind of what opened the doors to, consulting and the world that is the world we live in right now with PSO.
Right.
And so I've worked with small boutique firms. I've also worked for a large GSI, and I worked for Deloitte for about 3.5, 4 years. And then I went to Allstate Insurance and helped them stand up an actual change in culture vertical,
wow.
Which was really interesting with them. And then Google kind of came knocking and asked if I'd be interested in helping to lead the team here in the Americas region. They had a pretty well-represented team in EMEA and APAC. And so they were wanting to build out the team here in AMER. And so happy to join about 2 years ago and really bring kind of all the things that I've done within, working on large teams and actually, the psychology of how we change and all of my experience with change work with Deloitte and others, and kind of bring that all together into one role.
Look, the evolution of the PSO, the Professional Services Organization within Google, has been so amazing to watch over the last couple of years. You work in Patrick Shablitsky's organization, someone we know for a long time. He's been there a while. And of course, Jason Martin and then John Jester, sort of all of customer success. But it's having sort of a bigger market impact and a bigger customer impact than ever before. But can you describe sort of broad strokes what PSO is really all about?
So PSO kind of predates my time at Google a bit, so I'm not entirely sure how it all came about. But the essence of what we're doing is really trying to help our customers and our partners along that journey together, right? Because our partners are really the strategic, on the ground, boots on the ground, let's get the work done for our customers. Yeah. We're really there to offer, our best people and our best ideas to those projects. So we have great people who know so much, way more than I know, and they're able to help out with the tech. They're able to help out with, strategy, with, just thinking through transformation and culture, which is kind of my role. And that's really, I think, what we're here to be, is a catalyst to improve the project and really speed it up and make sure that we're able to overcome roadblocks.
What we've seen is just the benefit of the knowledge capital that is gathered over time in Google's experience working on the largest, most complex projects, the best practices that get generated out of that, and to the extent that we're partnering on certain implementations, how we benefit from that experience has been tremendous. And I think even more impactful has been the impact in the enterprise customers, the largest sort of named accounts in the world, the Fortune 100, and enterprises downstream, of the comfort to know that when they're choosing to go on this journey with Google Cloud, that Google's own professional services team members will be part of the team, right, that's going to help them on that journey. So it's not just partners by themselves, but it's Google, in the rear, in the front, in the back, just sort of supporting to make sure projects go really, really well.
Yeah, totally plugged in. And I think you made a great point about, we have a lot of different partners, and SADA being one of our premier partners. And there's lots of lessons learned, right? And lots of different projects. And I think Google kind of brings all of those projects together in one common knowledge, and works really hard at thought leadership as well around that. So when you're partnering with Google and when you're coming to Google wanting to solve complex problems, you're getting all of that experience and all of those lessons learned from our partners and our own experiences and thought leadership.
So you came into this role, I think even prior to, or just prior to Thomas Kurian and Rob Enslin joining, in sort of the Diane Green era, which was, I think, a massive leap forward for the ecosystem. What made you want to come to Google Cloud at that time?
Yeah, great question. I had been working with Allstate Insurance for a while, helping them with setting up, change practices and working in kind of managerial consulting, actually, helping their business units solve complex problems. The opportunity at Google was really to bring a lot of what I'd done prior into my role. So I'd had a lot of different roles. I had a lot of great things that I loved about them. This role just kind of seemed to bring that all together. And the opportunity at Google at the time, I remember when we were talking about, the Chicago office being 500 people when I was interviewing. And now we have 2 offices. In the time that I've been there, we built a new office. And so I think I just saw the kind of growth there and the opportunity to really make an impact somewhere.
A dedicated cloud building in Chicago now, which is awesome.
It's amazing.
I love traveling around the country and seeing like the Google Cloud logo on the buildings.
It's happening all over the place. Like I travel quite a bit too. And every time I go to Sunnyvale, I'm like, was that always our building or is that a new one? It's hard to tell.
Seattle is great. New York's getting their own. Chicago has it. And it makes a great impression to customers.
It does.
When you're walking in with them to have meetings and it says Google Cloud, it's not, we're just not, not a side project. We're like a big thing.
Yeah. Our customers and our partners love to come visit the offices. I think that is a big selling point. Our offices are very welcoming. It's a great place to come and actually, get some work done. It's out of their own office. So sometimes we'll do, really brainstorming sessions in our offices because we're getting their leadership out of their normal, space, which can be a little, I guess, kind of difficult.
It's like an offsite.
Yeah.
At a Google office.
Exactly. You can actually concentrate and focus.
Yeah. And also it's just such a creative and inspiring space. In almost every office I've been is like, it's just, get the creative juices flowing and get great ideas. And, the cloud space itself in Sunnyvale is like next level.
Very cool space.
I would venture to say, so we started the path of like the Microsoft divestiture around 2 years ago, certainly before TK and Rob were announced. I'd have to say that the trajectory and the wins and the success and the growth has probably exceeded even my own kind of wild expectations.
Definitely. I think our leadership came in and set up some really aggressive goals, and I think the teams have certainly delivered on that. We're seeing some really strategic customers. We're seeing some great relationships with partners like SADA, and I think we're all kind of growing together in all of that.
Yeah, like we have this immense pressure, or I feel this immense pressure to keep up, which is a great problem to have. And then on the other side, in sort of the public discourse, you see announcements like the Sabre 10-year deal, Activision. And what's exciting is that those deals are not just about the technology.
Right.
They're about completely transforming the way that travel is booked, like that whole experience for users, right? And the tie into search and how that's going to work. And for Activision, it's about gameplay and YouTube. It's not just about, run it in our data center, not in your data center, but in ours. Like the value proposition has grown immensely, and the way that Google sells has evolved immensely, which I think leads us back to your role because, PSO for a long time was just like you'd get project managers, maybe some technical account managers, you would get engineers, but now you're talking about a whole practice you're standing up in Americas around culture and people and change.
Yeah.
How does that impact the success of a project, and how do you actually engage?
Yeah, great question. It's, we kind of find, and from my experience in change, we find that a lot of projects technically are sound, right? Like you can put the technology in. It's not usually a problem. I mean, obviously there are roadblocks to that too, but at Google, we're able to do the same thing, right? We can install everything that we want. We can migrate data anywhere that we want. It's not really a problem. It's just how do we go about doing it? I think the biggest thing that we're finding as we're continuing to kind of learn about how organizations transform, and to be clear, change management and culture work didn't exist when I came out of college.
For sure.
Evolved in the last 10 years.
Yes.
And so we're still learning a ton about it. But I would say even 7 years ago, when I was working in change and kind of one of the first people to really be working in change, we had to beg people to come and do change work.
That's right.
And now we have people like busting down our door or demanding that we have change as part of our work stream.
Yes.
And the reason is that most of our technology projects fail because the people didn't adopt it.
That's
and
right.
We're not preparing them properly.
They don't fail because the technology doesn't work.
Right.
At all.
Yes.
That's seldom the reason that they fail, especially now. Like technologies, to your point, it's sound. Of course, Google technology particularly, you're going to get the performance you expect.
Right.
You're going to get the scale you expect. You're going to get the uptime you expect. Those things are sort of like, they're still very difficult and challenging, and the architecture has to be right. I don't want to sort of minimize how important that is. But you're right. If something fails, the top 1 or 2 reasons are, it's like bad project governance / project management. 2, change.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. And in this kind of era that we're living in now, again, 10 years ago, things weren't moving as fast as they are now.
That's right.
And they continue to get progressively faster every single year. Right. So we have people that are constantly changing and having to change the way that they work. And we have companies that are changing their infrastructure, their org charts. They're changing the way that they work. They're moving to the cloud, which essentially changes all of their job roles to be something almost completely different. And so it's just a change that's always going to be there. And so change management for me and kind of what I like to talk to our customers about is it's really an investment in your people. And we get a lot of pushback at times from customers about timelines because change is not a quick process, right? So I get to be that bad guy in the office that's like, hey, it might take a little longer than the 6 months you want it to be because we need to have all these things in place, right? And we need to make sure that we have training and communications. And we need to make sure we have executive alignment and support. We need to make sure that we're actually doing all of these things and helping to answer questions. And oftentimes the pushback is, well, we don't want it to be, a 3-year project. But the alternative is, hey, if you put in the greatest technology in the world and no one uses it, is it still the greatest technology in the world? Did it really move the needle?
Totally.
And a lot of our customers are not just looking for technology. They're looking for change in their culture too.
I totally credit cloud in itself in elevating the importance of this work and practice that you run, but similarly in the capabilities we've had to develop in the last decade. And it really started with just G Suite back in like 2007. Like systems integrators or VARs or whatever you want to call us back then, we didn't even do training. It just wasn't done. It was like when you bought services from SADA, you got maybe a project manager, engineers, and it was all about the bits and bytes. But actually it was Google who, I think, was it Caroline?
Yeah, who would have been one of the originals on the team.
Yeah, shout out to Caroline. She really enabled our first set of people to learn what it is to train end users, to do the messaging and comms appropriately, to run through that, change management process, which at the time was leaps and bounds more than what we had before, but still relatively rudimentary compared to where we are today. But it was all because G Suite was a subscription of something you bought that if you didn't successfully get people to use, they would not renew that next year or that next month. Software wasn't acquired like this in the past. People bought 3 years of software and hardware at a time, whether or not if it was ever implemented or implemented successfully. Sometimes it didn't even matter because they just had to upgrade, and they upgraded, right? When the time came up, when their contract was up. And all of a sudden we're like, we have to earn our value every month or every year. And I remember in education, specifically when Google was not even charging for the software, the only measure of success was adoption.
Right. And G Suite really changed the game in terms of, how people thought about the way that we work. Right. And G Suite in general, as we put it into our customers and we have more customers asking us for it all the time, it's actually not just about having a different tool. Like the tool is great and it does all of the things you could ever want it to do. And I personally think it's better than the competition. But at the end of the day, a lot of our customers don't come to G Suite just because it has amazing features and it's going to do different things than what their current software is doing. They come because they want to actually transform their culture.
Yes.
And G Suite forces you to do that.
It does.
With the way that you actually interact with one another and the way that you can share ideas and have that collaborative experience without ever even being in the same room. We laugh at Google oftentimes when we get together in person, especially at like Accelerate, which was just this last month. And we see each other and it takes a minute because you always have to ask yourself, have I actually met this person or do I just see them all the time and interact with them?
I feel like I've met them.
Yeah. So there's many times when you start talking to someone that you know for a really long time, you're like, have we never met in person? And that's the beauty, I think, of G Suite is it brings people together in that way and it changes the feeling of disparate office locations being something of the past. Doesn't matter anymore.
Before G Suite came along, there was not really another dominant, hyper popular productivity tool. The incumbent was sold on the premise of nothing changes. Right. You don't have to train at all. Like that's why we never learned how to build a training practice around the old paradigm. But this was the first time, especially as it started to enter the commercial space, you're changing the number one most frequently used application for 100% of your employees. There's no system that impacts 100% of the employees for the number one most frequently used application like a G Suite implementation.
And all at the same time.
Yeah, so it became a necessity to get really good at this. Otherwise, especially because generally, and you studied psychology, as you know, like there's this initial resistance to change. So if you don't make the change be something that's sort of visibly positive or philosophically positive or culturally positive, it's not going to be an easy road.
And I think you bring up a really good point that I'd expand on a little bit because as we continue to learn more about the way people work, and primarily neuroscience and neuropsychology are at the cutting edge of that. And as we're continuing to build our practice and build assets, our assets are bringing in more and more of that neuroscience because, you mentioned people naturally resist change and they do. And it's hardwired into your brain. It's all the things and how your brain works are totally against anything change, right? So as we continue to learn more, we're bringing more of that into our methodologies and into our assets because we're changing that conversation. And I think from a senior executive level, I've had many conversations where it goes down this kind of road of, well, they're just not going to do that, or they're not going to want to do that, or they'll resist that. And changing that conversation to be more around, of course they're going to resist. Everyone will resist naturally. There's no question about it.
So you don't have a defensive posture around it. You're actually leading with, yes, you're right.
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. They will. And I talk about that a lot in discussions at like larger forums. And a lot of times the light bulb kind of comes on. They're like, oh, so we're not really worried about the fact that they'll resist. No, 100% not.
We're planning on it.
We're planning that they will. And what we're doing is we're helping to create ways and avenues that they can overcome their own resistance and go through their own change curve to adoption. And that's really what, my team focuses on.
Look, the good news is, now it's a well understood practice. In the early days, it was hard to get people even to pay for it because they're like, what do you mean? Like, they didn't want to pay for a project manager, let alone, adoption, change management, and training and comms, because they assumed it was just like, it's going to be like every other project where we just don't do it. Eventually, obviously, it's well understood today. The reason that we have bet our business on the Google set of technologies and Google Cloud is that they insist that there's a cultural change. It's not even optional. You can deploy other cloud solutions and other productivity suites and actually have people work exactly the same way they were working before. With Google, it's virtually impossible, but there's the opportunity. Right. And for the traditional enterprise, and I know you've worked on some of the biggest, scariest projects, that's often becomes the reason they're doing it. Because if they feel like they're facing an existential crisis with regards to like their market position. They've been around for 100 years, but their cheese is moving around. You got upstarts that are competing with them. How are they going to operate and not only survive but thrive in the new market dynamics if they don't have a distinct moment where they've decided to culturally shift?
It won't happen. And we have a lot of customers coming to us who are being disrupted, right? I feel like the industry anymore, like everything's disrupted. Like there's no industry left that hasn't been disrupted.
Nothing is safe.
when they're coming to us, they're like, well, we've had another disruption, right? Here's the newest thing that people are doing, and we need to be more agile than we are today. And a lot of that is driving their move to the cloud, is agility, right? Their ability to react fast, their ability to spin up a VM and test something out or do whatever they need to do very, very quickly. And it doesn't require them to buy more product or, actual things to put in a room. So they want to be more agile. They want to be able to compete with the startups that are actually disrupting the industry. And they want to be able to meet their customers where they are. And, as we have more disruption in the industry, customers and consumers want that type of experience.
For sure.
So our larger companies that have been around for a really long time need to adopt those same types of working, whether that's user experience or, just the way that things work in general. And with all of that, I mean, we have this incredible opportunity to change our cultures. And so a lot of our customers are taking advantage of that.
Yeah.
And saying, hey, I have a workforce that is aging. And that's a fact. Like there's no doubt about it. The majority of our workforce is aging. And we have new people coming in who are a completely different generation, right?
They've never used anything else but G Suite.
Right. They have no idea. Like
or like so digital native that like the concept of on-premise hardware is completely foreign.
Yes. Yeah. And having to work into a, matrix organization where you aren't able to talk and collaborate with other people, they just don't even know it. So a lot of our companies are on that kind of precipice where they're like, hey, we not only have disruption that we need to make changes on, we also have culture that we need to work on, because we've got like 3 different cultures in our company because of just generational differences. And our products help with that. And I think they're really a big catalyst for that change.
I've actually become hyper optimist with regards to people's ability to transform and change. I think before we were facing such an uphill battle with like this fatalistic attitude internally. Not only that change is hard, there'll be resistance, but like we used to get like, you will never get Susie to use this. Like we used to get that all the time. Or people that were deploying, certain things in GCP, and like the traditional server huggers like, but this is my job. Like you're taking my job away. And so I think we've done this long enough, and there's been enough stories in the press. There's been a lot of peers in sort of the decision maker sphere of our enterprise customers who've done it that are now experiencing the positive upside. I've become a hyper optimist. Like when you can deploy 100-year-old organizations or public sector entities successfully and have them come out on the other side happy and excited, I now believe any organization can experience the benefits of it. If, yes, they're unique and we need to customize some things, but if they take your or our prescriptive approach, they will come out happier on the other side.
Rule number 1, you actually have to follow the methodology. So we always have issues with that as well, right? Like we have different things that are roadblocks that we're not able to fully follow a methodology or whatever, but following that methodology is key. And I'm with you. I'm a hyper optimist in terms of anyone can adopt any change that's put in front of them. And not to get neurological on you, but we all have neuroplasticity. So that means that we can create new connections at any time. Our brain can completely change as we need it to. No one is actually unable to change. And to your point, I think previously we heard a lot more about, I've even heard, you'll pry this out of my cold dead hands, things like that. And I don't think we hear that anymore. I think the change and the rapid rate of change has actually helped us for the better, because a lot of our companies that maybe don't have strong digital native presence yet, as they're, a more established older company, they had issues like that. And now they're coming to us and they're seeing all of this change, and their people are seeing all of this change, and they're finding out that, hey, actually, if I adopt this change and I'm positive about it and I'm open to the opportunity rather than seeing it as kind of this like doomsday prophecy, it's only going to help me in my career.
Totally.
Because they're seeing all those people who did it the last time they changed, and guess what?
And they have cooler jobs.
Yeah, they're the people that moved up. They're the people that were put in charge of things, and those are the people that you want to put on that pedestal and say, this is who we want in our company.
I think it's overall just hopefully maybe a little renaissance around the growth mindset. Like, we have a growth mindset. Let's all have a growth mindset. We're not going to continue to keep up and perform in the current environment unless we believe that we can change and think differently. There's that, which I think is good. The other thing is past performance. Reference customers. That helps. When a CIO that decides to deploy any of the key solutions from Google Cloud, whether it's G Suite or GCP, when they have some successful project or two or accomplish something really big, then they move up like into the board, or they get hired by a much larger organization. There's enough of those stories that people are like, there's something to be there. And by the way, resistance is futile. If you want any chance of attracting top talent moving forward, both coming out of school or not, then you should be on these platforms.
Being on it for 2 years for business, after I came to Google, and I went through that change curve, I was like, oh my gosh, like, I had taken all of the certifications for like Excel, and I was, a wizard at Excel, and I was very nervous. I was like, oh my gosh, Sheets seems daunting. I have to relearn this. But once you get into it and you kind of use it day in and day out, my days are so much more productive. My email is so much more productive. And I could not imagine going back. I think it would definitely be a hard sell if anyone else offered me a job and they weren't on G Suite.
See? You're like a use case right there. You're a case in point. I feel the same way. We decided to hire PwC for some of our consulting work precisely because they themselves are on G Suite. How about that vendor selection? Yeah. Like, if they're on G Suite, I know I can work, better with you. Let's talk about some customer stories, because I know you and I were briefly chatting about healthcare. Again, healthcare, highly regulated, historically super anti-cloud, maybe up until 3-4 years ago. And dire need of reinvention, of transformation. That actually comprises a lot of our customer base as well. That's actually it's top vertical for us. I know you've done a lot of work there too, but tell us some interesting customer stories.
Yeah, so I mean, we just deployed G Suite to one of our largest deployments ever. In 90 days. So they actually did a big bang, like we did the 3 deployment methodology.
In 90 days.
In 90 days from first deployment to full deployment. So they went from, I think they deployed 155,000 people over a weekend, which is an incredible amount. We obviously have customers who are larger than them.
Core IT early adopters and everybody?
Yep.
I'm glad that I still know the methodology and the verbiage, man. I still know it.
You got it. See? Muscle memory, right?
Exactly.
This was a very challenging project. We'd never done it before. The previous customer that we had done was about 65,000 in over a weekend. And again, that was a big milestone for us as well.
So we're talking about like this change. No other IT project is like this. Like, I'm going to come in on Monday, and the tool that I rely on the most is different than it was on Friday. That's immense. Like, it's crazy.
It's insane to it's almost like saying goodbye on Friday and like starting a whole new job on Monday.
Yeah.
And you've got to learn a lot. And so with this particular customer, I mean, it was a healthcare customer. So we had huge barriers and obstacles because, one, like you said, highly regulated. So we have to make sure that everything is compliant and that we're doing everything in the right way, that their process is compliant, because our products are compliant. But some people are using different processes. We've got to investigate, what third-party applications need to plug in and how we make that work. That was a ton of work. And not only that, but they're also dispersed all over because being healthcare, they have, some main offices, but most often they have like a region. And then most of the staff is actually in hospitals, clinics, or mobile.
And they're busy.
Yeah.
Like they have a very intense job. Yes. And they still need to be part of the migration.
Absolutely. Yeah, trying to get a neurosurgeon's time to teach them about their new email is probably not going to happen.
or nurse practitioner or anybody. Like, they are, 12-hour shifts 3 times, 3-4 days a week. Like,
well, they're in a 3-shift rotation, right? Because healthcare never stops. So if you're in a hospital, there's rotations 24 hours a day. So it's a very different model than what, we had done a ton of times, right? Like we've done a lot of implementations. We've done a few like this and none at this scale. And so where change and culture and transformation work actually really came in was looking at a lot of their use cases and thinking through how do they do it today versus how they'll do it tomorrow. And I guess our partner and our customer really focused a lot on that and actually put a lot of time and effort into, we're actually going to do a lot of interviews. I think they did, I want to say 300 plus interviews with stakeholders.
Across different groups.
Across different geographies, across different roles, just to learn about what is the experience for you today and what are the things that you're working on and the process that you use today that we need to make sure you can still do tomorrow. So a great example is that there was I want to say they called it a tumor review board. And basically that was a huge use case for ML and AI because they basically share photos from the scans, CT scans or whatever it might be. And they have other people review it, like a second opinion to say, hey, I think we found something here.
Very critical.
Something
that's
very
going
critical.
To impact someone's life in a major way.
And we have other healthcare companies who have used ML and AI to actually be able to predict this even better than two, very, very educated, highly respected doctors and can do it at a better rate. And so this is a great use case for changing and transforming the way that we're working today and with better result, right? And so we spent a lot of time doing that. I think that was a critical reason for the success of this migration to G Suite, because we actually kind of met the audience where it was. Right. We want to make sure that you're prepared. And so we ran we're running a lot of transformation labs as well. So identified those kind of sticking points for certain groups.
Because I think that's really important, just that whole approach of doing the interviews and focusing the interviews on what are you trying to accomplish and how can we do it different and better in the new platform. Not how can we recreate this thing in we have a customer who runs most of their business on Microsoft Access. It's look, we're not going to replicate Microsoft Access. We're going to do it better. So I think that orientation and people being receptive and open to that conversation has a lot to do, I think, with the approach, with their psychology. It's how do you lower their defense mechanism? How do you create a more open sort of orientation?
It's very personal, right? I mean,
personal.
You're taking something that people are very attached to and also feel very confident. So they're feeling that loss of status, basically. They're like, hey, I'm an expert at my job.
Right.
You're basically taking away my expertise at this point. And so helping them to cope with that, because that's a coping mechanism,
totally
right?
Is.
Fear and resistance is a coping mechanism when you feel loss. So going in there and meeting them where they are and understanding and acknowledging that loss, I think is really critical. And it's more of that human side of things.
Totally.
And way different than we've ever done it.
Soft skills were never part of IT.
No.
What is this?
I know.
What is soft skill?
We're bringing them. They're
human
here.
level interaction. I love it. No, I think it's precisely what we see sort of day in and day out. And I think part of the reason our G Suite implementations have been so successful is because we did learn very early on. It's almost a decade that how important this is as part of a project. But I think the biggest accounts, the biggest enterprises still come with their own set of challenges because there's more variables. There's people that are pro, there's people that are hoping secretly your project will fail. There's people that are very nervous, people that are close to retirement, people that just started. And getting everybody to row in the same direction is, I think, part of that process and part of the magic, actually.
And that's why executive sponsorship is so key for a project like this.
Yes.
Honestly.
It has to come top down a lot of times.
Yes. And you have to have them actually there and visible and sharing the message. I think that's commonly a misconception about executive sponsorship is that they're like, yeah, I'll put my name on it. And that's not executive sponsorship.
You got to be there.
Yeah.
You got to show up. You got to be first on the platform. There's a lot of things that the right champions
have to model that behavior. Yeah. And 100%. I think that's a key part of the methodology that I know our partners are really pushing, but we as Google are doing a lot of thought leadership around how do we engage sponsors? What does the right engagement look like for sponsors? I mean, our executives are super busy. I mean, it's just a fact of the matter, right? We're not going to, you can't just go up to them and say, hey, I need 5 hours of your time on Friday for us to whiteboard something. That's not going to happen. Yeah. So you have to make sure that you're actually engaging the people that can influence them as well.
It's actually part of our almost qualification process in the pursuit, in the pre-sales motion is, are there executive sponsors at the right level who are totally bought in? We're not just saying they're bought in, but they're totally bought in and want to kind of actually bet their careers on this in a meaningful way. And again, we're betting 1,000. I think anybody who's bet their career has seen great outcomes from that. And without that, though, we won't even really engage in helping a customer do a real evaluation if we don't feel like the executive sponsorship is in place, because we know what we're going to run into.
And that, I mean, so that's kind of G Suite. And we've talked a lot about G Suite. I think GCP and our cloud platform is another space where change and culture and transformation is really going to play.
But in a different way.
In a different way.
Do you want to talk about how it's different?
So we're exploring it a little bit right now. Our team, which I have to give a great shout out to our team. We've got our team in NAMER, in EMEA, in APAC, all working together to solve this problem. Nice. Because we see the value in it. Obviously we do, because we're change, people. But kind of creating a methodology that can be repeatable, can be standardized, and ensure that we're doing the right best practices is a difficult process. And so the team has really, really worked hard on this. And we actually have a couple customers that we're working with right now that we're utilizing some of the things that we have put together, where we basically got in a room and we said, okay, what are the key facets of change? And what do we need to be thinking about? And we kind of whiteboarded and put together this idea of what do you need to be thinking about in terms of change for your GCP or cloud platform.
That's amazing.
Move. And our EMEA team and our AMER team, with some input, released a couple of white papers on it as well. And so we kind of took that and we're harnessing all of that knowledge and putting it into one of our projects right now. And I'll give you an example just from an infrastructure project. As we're going through it, again, technology, super sound. They're like, they're so good at it. And I was like in awe watching it, because I'm still trying to really wrap my head around what are all the different pieces of GCP and how can each of them help our customers. And there's a lot, right? I think there's like 70 plus applications within the overarching platform.
That's right, so many.
And so
I think more than that.
I'm sure it's tons more. Yeah. Probably 70 that we can fit on the slide that you can actually see. They're kind of running through this and they've got this down. And so I always kind of felt a little bit like I was stopping the train a little bit and asking questions. But what we kind of found was that part of the journey that was missing in some respects is, for our largest customers, oftentimes your project team is very small compared to the actual number of people that are going to be affected.
Yeah.
And one of the questions and one of the things that we're working to answer is around what do job roles look like? Who do we need when? Because going to the cloud and going to Google Cloud Platform is a journey, right? Like,
for sure.
It depends on where you need to be and what you're trying to achieve.
Where you're starting.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we started to develop this kind of 3-phased approach in maturity, and looking at a maturity assessment of the organization as they're going along this journey, and trying to understand what roles are needed in each level of maturity. So an example would be, I reference it as like core operations. So just to maintain the infrastructure and run a data lake, what roles are necessary to do that task? All right. That's like our maturity level number 1. Maturity level number 2 is we want to migrate things one for one. No specialty, anything. We just need to migrate data from here, put it in the cloud.
Right.
Who do we need to do that?
Right.
And then third is more transformational in terms of, okay, here are the things that we couldn't just migrate. Here are the things we actually have to make changes to, or we have to completely deprecate and re-architect, create new solutions. That's where, let's create an ML formula that can actually look at tumor photos, things like that. That's in that phase 3, right? And who do we need for that? And so from all of that kind of research and actively on a project, we're developing kind of a kit almost for our partners and for our customers to look through.
I would love to participate in the review of that. Yes. I think that's extremely valuable, because the reality is completely different types of culture change that we're talking about when it's cloud, but it's culture change nonetheless. Right. And by the way, not necessarily the most receptive group. Like, you're talking about engineers learning to change how they do their jobs, but the upside being, wow, do they become way more valuable as they learn kind of the new paradigm of how to run operations or make changes or commit code or make releases in a completely different architecture than they were used to before, like, no ops, low ops, CI/CD, like all these things that are going to impact an engineering organization within an enterprise. So valuable. And it's not a tough sell that this is good for them to learn, but the tough sell often is, hey, I just learned this other stuff. I feel pretty good about where we are. But if we can deliver the same sort of excitement that we've learned over the last decade plus on the G Suite side to the engineering organization and infrastructure teams and app dev teams, wow, that's super powerful.
Yeah, it'll really be, I feel like it'll be very transformational for our customers.
Game changing.
It will really take their experience to another level. And what I really love about kind of where we're going with it is we're finding that our customers don't necessarily know what their organization is going to look like.
True.
And so that's a piece that we're still trying to iron out, because let's be real, we're a small team, and we're not a big GSI where we have a dedicated practice to org change and all of that. So we're kind of learning through our partners as well as learning ourselves in the work that we're doing, and trying to figure out what is the best cloud structure.
That's right.
And who do you need? Because we have companies who are really wanting to harness SRE.
Yep.
That requires a different way of working. It requires different roles and different people. Also within each role. So developers, for instance, there might be senior developers, there might be developer leads, there might be just regular fresh out of school developers. And so there's a whole range of role, right?
Yeah.
And
product managers, all these roles.
And what does it require for each of them, and where do they need to be to do their role? Because not everyone needs to take the cloud architect certification, right?
Correct.
But what are the roles that need to have it to be able to perform their job function?
There's definitely a subset that do.
Absolutely.
For sure. Yeah, and that's, I think it's a great point that you made, like the certification journey as part of that. And again, if you talk about like incentives for people to want to do it, I think that that architect certification is like the highest paying job.
It is.
In IT right now. And I think that's wonderful. And I didn't actually know to the degree that you've been working on this, but I think in the spirit of everything we've been talking about with, Jason Martin and John and everybody else, and like the new alignment with Google PSO and partners, and how we're going to be doing a lot more work together, which we're starting to feel like in the last few months especially. I'd love to partner with you on this specifically and get better at it kind of early in the evolution of this practice area for Google, because I think it can be a key differentiator, especially for the enterprise.
And I mean, I think obviously who better to deploy this than our own partners, because you guys have the experience. And so, it's a work in progress. We're trying to iron out and trying to get some more use cases to say like, okay, we've done it a few times and this has worked, this hasn't worked. And so that's kind of where we're at. We're in that, like, I'd say maybe pre-beta phase, where we're like, okay, let's pilot some of these ideas. And we're looking forward to a couple of customers that we have where we're actually going to pilot what we think is the right way forward for an infrastructure project. And the big thing around this is actually around training and certification, because what's the timeline? Like, when do they need to have this training? Because the training that you look at, like on Coursera or Quick Labs, it kind of shows you, here are all the things that a developer should have. But we're trying to break that into chunks and say,
you could do that in 12 months, or you could do that in 12 weeks. Like, there's no set timeline.
And give different options, right? So our big push right now for me, and what I've been working on for the last couple of months, is around what does that time frame look like? And to the maturity assessment that we were talking about, who needs to know what when? And do we need our developers to take 12 weeks of training before we ever even really go live? Probably not, right? We probably need them to take 5 weeks of training.
That's right, especially because some of the skills they have are simply transferable with a little bit of coaching.
They're just learning more hands-on stuff, which is like the great quick lab stuff that you can actually go through and do what you need to do. So it'll be definitely different, but I'm excited to see where it goes.
That's a super exciting note to end our podcast on, because it's so transformational. Again, I think if Google Cloud and its partners do that decidedly better than the alternatives, I think it's just a comprehensive part of the win strategy. Because the enterprise wants to feel more than anything that it's supported. Travis, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, Tony. This is great.
Great to have you in the office.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Cloud and Clear. Check the show notes for links to this week's topics. And don't forget to connect with us on Twitter @CloudandClear and our website, sada.com. Be sure to rate and review the show on your favorite podcast app.